listeners, and welcome to the latest episode of Extra Extra. It's all about whiskey. I am your host, Jason JY. Over there is Joshua Morrissey H. Hatton. And every episode, yeah, you want to know what the H stands for? I will tell you. No, I'm not telling you. Regular listeners will know that each episode, one of us brings a whiskey-related news story to the attention of the other. We read it in the first half, we riff on it in the second half, and we always get out of here in a tight 35. Last episode, 35 minutes, even.
There may have been 12
I know
seconds
what you're going to say.
Yeah, because I like being accurate. It's 12 seconds on top of that, Jason.
It's a tight 35. There are no additional seconds. Tight 35,
is that it?
my friend.
Oh, so you just round down.
35.
I got you.
Remember?
Oh, I do
This
remember.
was what you said to Ollie.
That's right. Yes, always a tight 35. Always. This was
Bless
the
you.
tightest. Anyway.
Very quickly, before we go on with today, and we're back on Islay again today. It's a hot spot right now. In our last episode of One Nation Under Whiskey, you interviewed Ollie Chilton.
Yes.
Ollie is part of the team behind Port na Trúin on Islay. And in the episode, you talked a little bit about housing, connected to proposal for the distillery, on again, off again. I'm just putting this out there for listeners of Extra Extra. If you haven't listened to that interview with Oliver Chilton, as we know him, Ollie Chilton, please do go back and do so. There's also some comments in relation to that episode of Extra Extra that exist within that One Nation Under Whiskey episode as well. So
That's right. Yep.
So if you're a regular, dedicated, extra kind of listener, I do recommend dipping back into the last Ollie Chilton episode of One Nation Under Whiskey. I feel like value was added to what we had previously covered in Extra Extra.
Oh, that's beauty. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay, so we move on today by staying on Islay. And Joshua, as much as this is your turn to bring an article to my attention, I know we're in a position where we've had a few people mention this to us.
Yeah.
Once again, Mr. Michael Nolan, who had brought the last Islay-related piece to our attention, him and Jam, and he was excited to hear us talk about this and cover this. And it's a story we've known about, but we have sat on.
Yeah, it's
We've kept stum.
We did keep stum, right? I was on Islay when I heard about this and figured, well, this really isn't my story to share. I was kind of told on the DL, and of course, you may tell very tight industry friends, but it's not something we'd ever blast out onto our podcast unless it were, we're interviewing the people at the distillery. But this story did come out. It's piqued a lot of people's interest. And so I think it's good that we talk about Master of Malt's article, which is titled, Islay Distillers Face Peated Malt Shortages. Are you ready, Jason? Are you strapped in?
I am strapped in.
All right. So the article, which came out on October 12, was penned by one Henry Jeffries. So there's a subheader. It says, there is no need to panic by yet, but there are Islay peated malt shortages on the horizon for Scotch whiskey distillers, with Port Ellen maltings especially facing unprecedented demand. Here's the full story. It started as a tip-off from an anonymous source on Islay. Oh, Jesus, was that me, Jason? I didn't tip anyone off.
Oh,
Nelly.
you.
Oh,
You're
Nelly.
not getting told any
Jesus.
stories if it was you.
So here's what Joshua Hatton had to say. Jinkies. The supply of Port Ellen maltings to non-Diageo distilleries would be limited in 2023 and may be stopped entirely in 2024. So we did a bit of digging. Robbie Miller from Beam Suntory, owner of Bowmore and Lafroig, had this to say when we asked him, quote, we are aware of the Port Ellen situation and have been working to address the consequences of Diageo's decision to restrict supplies, end quote.
I know you don't know off the top of your head, but it's interesting that Robbie Miller from Beam Suntory is just presented in that way, right? like Robbie Miller job title from Beam Suntory. It's like, just Robbie. Robbie over at Beam Suntory.
Oh, he's that guy over at Beam.
Yeah, rolls the casks. You know him, Robbie.
So this next section is simply titled Peated Malt Shortages. And it continues. Then another major distiller on Islay told us, quote, Diageo has substantially cut all of their external customers for 2023, and I have not yet had a chat with them about 2024, but it is a distinct possibility. He wanted to go on the record, but Anthony Wills, here we go. He didn't want to go on the record, but Anthony Wills from Kilchoman was happy to talk. Quote, my understanding is they, Diageo's customers, have been told from 2024 they will not be able to provide the level of malt they currently get. When we put this to Ian Smith, head of corporate relations at Diageo, he said yeah, there you go.
Job title.
Oh, yeah, there you go. That's interesting. One job title, one not job title.
Yeah. FYI, Robbie Miller is the managing director of Beam Suntory. Robbie!
Just
Robbie! Robbie! Yo, Rob!
He said he, quote, and this is Ian Smith, quote, would not contradict what they are saying, end quote. Mm-hmm. He then released the following statement, quote, we can't comment on the detail of commercial supply contracts, but it is the case that we have seen significant increased demand for malted barley from our Port Ellen maltings. As a result, the maltings are operating at full capacity, and we are managing supply accordingly. We deeply value our relationship with our fellow distillers and customers and are doing everything we can to assist them within the supply constraints alongside considering potential future solutions, end quote. Mm-hmm. And now it seems each section has sort of a subheader. So this subheader simply states unprecedented demand. The problem is that demand for peated malt from Port Ellen maltings from Diageo's Islay distilleries is at an unprecedented level. Kalila was shut for much of the pandemic. Now it's back to 7 days a week. Combine that with the resumption of distilling at Port Ellen for the first time since 1983 and the continued demand for Lagavulin, and you have a problem. There was talk in the past of expanding capacity at Port Ellen maltings, but for whatever reason, it never happened. Georgie Crawford, formerly of Port Ellen and Lagavulin distilleries, and now at Elixir on Islay, said, quote, it was foreseeable. Everyone saw it coming, yet Diageo took the option to not expand. Another Islay distiller said, off the record, quote, they should expand. Why haven't they? End quote. Yeah, we chuckle, but this really is serious business. Anyway, he continued that it's not just an Islay thing. Quote, overall malting capacity is an issue. It's creaking at the seams, end quote. Anthony Wills from Kilchoman said, quote, securing malt supply for malt next year is incredibly difficult. Across the industry, there's a squeeze. According to Wills, Baird's Maltsters has just added 57 tons of capacity, while Simpson's is seeking planning permission for new maltings at Speyside. Quote, everyone is at full capacity, he added. Malt supply was further hampered by a fire in the peated kiln at Crisps in Port Gordon. Oh, I didn't hear about that. That would have been a story to cover. If only there were a news podcast. Anyway. So
don't look at us.
The next section is entitled Logistical Difficulties. One large Scottish maltster told us that it is not taking on any more customers. Quote, the amount of inquiries we are having to walk away from, it's more than I have seen in the last 30 years. Wow.
That's a big number, right?
Yeah, right? Oh, geez, I have to try to remember something for the riffing section.
Remember and read.
Oof.
That's a big
Jason,
ask.
Jason.
Hope there's no chewing gum in your mouth.
You should see me walk. With all the expansion going on, he added, quote, "The industry is in a tight spot." He said that both Glenmorangie and Beam Suntory had come to him for malt. He hopes that the demand will encourage Diageo and the other maltsters to expand. The Islay problem is particularly acute. That word has a tough time in my mouth. Particularly acute because even if distillers can secure supplies from the mainland, the island's creaking transport infrastructure based around CalMac ferries, which we discussed, make getting it there difficult. Currently, CalMac doesn't have the capacity to accommodate the additional freight that would be required. Plus, the fact that many distilleries depend on specifically Islay malt for their flavor profile and the marketing. Not all peated malt is the same. According to Anthony Wills, Laphroaig alone needs 5 or 6 loads of malt per week, each one weighing around 28 tons. That's a pretty hefty carbon footprint if it was all to come from the mainland. And then this is our final paragraph. It seems this malt shortage isn't just a Scottish or even...
Your tongue decided it had enough. Your tongue was just like, I'm out of here, brother. I'm gone. I'll be over at the bar having a beer if anybody needs me.
I really am having a tough time today. It seems this malt shortage isn't just a Scottish or even a British problem. Apparently, energy shortages in Germany have meant that some maltsters have had to shut down entirely. Never mind a whiskey shortage. What happens if there's a European beer shortage and winter is coming? Maybe it is time to panic a little. Oh, that is a killer last line. I like that. That was a jump scare of a last line.
There's a few bits and bobs to discuss here. We'll be back in the second half. Welcome back to the second half, where we can freely riff. I've been biting my tongue through that first half as you were reading through it. Am I right in saying that Ollie brought this up as part of the last episode? You and Ollie had this in the interview in the last episode of One Nation Under Whiskey?
Well, yes and no. I mean, to be honest, we had that conversation just discussing it, very surface. And I actually removed that bit from it because we decided at the end that, none of these distilleries have really come out. Diageo really hasn't come out, and it's not our story to be telling. Mm-hmm. I want to say this very clear. As much as we're saying it isn't our story to tell, we're not trying to say this isn't, Master of Malt shouldn't have shared this story, right? There's a reason we're reading it. It's newsworthy information, and so I'm glad the article came out. But but to answer your question directly, we may have touched on it a bit during the conversation, but I removed the bulk of what had been discussed because it just didn't seem proper to us.
Yeah, it is interesting though that you say that you don't necessarily have an issue with Master of Malt blowing the lid off this. Stories based off of anonymous tips out of Islay, I think is maybe taking a little chance on breaking a story. It's not Master of Malt's story to tell. Right. What I do like about this is that Anthony Wills went on record when asked. Robbie Miller of Beam Suntory went on record when asked. Yeah. Ian Smith of Diageo going on the record. Right. I like the fact that none of those three people ran from this when presented with it.
Yeah.
I think that is a worthy development from this story. I also like the fact that Anthony Wills talks about Bayards, right?
Yeah.
It's and other maltsters on the mainland, and says this isn't just an Islay thing, and part of our conversations with Ollie as we're talking about Portnatroon, and we're talking about Tormore, and we're talking about contracts, and we're talking about malt and fuel and caustic. Things are getting difficult within the industry. Things have been difficult,
Yes.
and again, Ollie says this in the last episode, right? Glass, paper, cardboard, shipments, hauling, right? It's all been difficult. Now other factors are coming into play on top of that. And so while, as Henry says here, at least at the beginning, it's not a time to panic. It is a time to inform the consumer writ large,
Yeah.
right? About the industry, the state of the industry. And I wonder if we will see a larger statement coming from the Scotch Whisky Association to give them a chance to set the record straight on where the industry is.
Yeah.
We read reports on bumper export numbers or export rebound post-pandemic, or exports are back despite the tariffs, you know, US/Trump tariffs, right? Like, we see those stories. Could we also get a level-headed story that says, here's where we are with malt, where we are with energy? I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a responsible response.
All of that would be really interesting to see, and interesting coming from them too, right? As the authority there. I had asked a question when all of this came up on Islay. I'll be honest, I don't remember who I asked the question to, but it basically was, is the shortage because there's less grain due to the war in Ukraine, right? Because so much grain was coming out of Ukraine. And the quick answer was no, that the bottleneck was at the malting plant, not that there was a shortage of barley, which I found quite interesting.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that answer.
Yeah, I was.
I don't think that's correct.
This is what I was told.
Yeah, I think somebody maybe told you what they thought you wanted to hear, because we've certainly heard from other people, malt prices are going up because there's not enough malt to go around.
Because they can't make enough of it, but it's not a barley issue. It's the capacity to malt the barley.
No, I understand that part on the malting side, but I think we also know there's not enough barley to go around, right? It's affecting food prices that there's not enough barley to go around.
Yeah, no, that is fair. As we were reading this, right, it becomes this extra thing that we've been talking about incessantly, right? What's today's problem? Oh, there's a glass shortage.
Yeah.
Okay, right,
Yeah.
right. What's the problem? Oh, well, labels take longer. Okay, geez, that stinks. All right, what's the next problem? Oh, well, packaging. We can't get it out of China because of the COVID shutdowns. Okay, right. Right now, what's the next problem? Oh, it's casks, right? We can't get ex-bourbon casks. And if ex-bourbon casks are available, a lot of times they're rinsed out, because it's not just Jim Beam, but there's other bourbon producers that are trying to extract as much from that oak as possible. Like, okay, what the fuck is the next problem, right? And it's just like pile. And now here we are with malt, and whether it is correct or not correct that the malting process is your bottleneck or not. My hope, at least for our, putting an eye back onto Ollie, our last guest, my hope is for them, where they're doing the malting, it looks like they'll be doing the bulk of their malting on site, they may be a little protected, maybe, I'm not sure.
At least in the beginning. But
Yeah, at least in the beginning.
right? Look what Anthony's run into with Kilchoman. It's when you want to expand, what are the factors
Yeah.
blocking you from expansion?
Yep.
And it's getting more malt. And so, Anthony's got that same response of a floor maltings, but you're only dealing with a percentage of your own malting to get, your spirit distilled.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know exactly how much output Port Ellen Maltings has ton-wise, because pre-pandemic, we knew that Kalila was a 7 million liter capacity distillery, but they were working at around 4 million liters, right, for a good while. Then they shut, right? So malt was available when they were 4 million.
Mm-hmm.
Then they shut. Then they're back up. It sounds as if they're
Yeah.
back up to capacity. That puts a strain. And then of course, the new Port Ellen. But I'm not sure. Maybe you know, maybe you don't.
Mm-hmm.
What is the expected output for Port Ellen's new? You don't know?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. But it's going to require malted barley,
Yeah.
whereas for 40 years it hasn't.
That's a
Right.
very good point. Yeah, that's a very, very good point.
Right? That's 3 distilleries on
Yeah.
Islay
Yeah.
that the Diageo maltings are responding to the needs of, while more are being built. Meanwhile, you've had Bruichladdich for years taking it off the island and heading up to Inverness, getting malted and then returning to the island. And then the thought of, well, could someone else on the island do that? Yeah, it comes with a carbon footprint and there's no infrastructure to support it. So, I think when I read over this, it certainly made me think it's not easy producing whiskey on a Hebridean island.
Nope.
And Islay has done a phenomenal job of pulling this off. And as the demand continues and other factors come into play, like we discussed in the last Extra, there's no easy solutions when you're based on a Hebridean island.
Yeah.
Every solution is difficult. So what do you do? what do you do?
Well,
do you do the anti-business stance and you stagnate, you stop, you stay where you are? You're Anthony Wills at Kilchoman and you say demand is far outstripping supply, but we're going to pull a Springbank and we're just going to stick to the numbers that we stick to?
No, I think it was interesting hearing Ollie and his comments in our interview where I said, "What are you excited for?" And one of his points was, I'm excited for these problems because it gives us an opportunity basically to solve the problems, right? And look, Springbank is Springbank, and Springbank is going to do what Springbank is going to do while everybody's going to say, what is Springbank doing? I think distilleries
Not
like...
increasing capacity. Breaking news next week, Springbank expands capacity.
Right. In the end, distilleries are factories. And factories have always, as much as they could, tried to vertically integrate their processes so they could rely on third parties less. Quite often it was for a cost savings purpose. But now distilleries aren't in a cost savings, this isn't about cost savings. It's about maintaining your current output, keeping people employed, and how do you solve that? How do you vertically integrate? How do you malt your own? How does Kilchoman potentially increase their maltings, or Lefroy increase their maltings, right? They do 15% of their own maltings. So they're going to have to think about all of this. My guess is, and Henry mentioned it in the article, and you've mentioned it in the past, because of the CalMac ferry system, to rely more heavily on maltsters off-island can't be supported by CalMac. It's got to be done on the island. It doesn't necessarily have to be done on the island, but I think that's likely going to be the answer for these distilleries, whether that's what they want to do or if they reluctantly do that.
Final point, and then we'll start wrapping up here. But this conversation has made me think of the conversation we had around bourbon and rye when we were talking about wood shortages. Simply 4 barrels.
I was told it was a good size, right?
No, you've never heard that in your life. But when we discussed that previously, you and I were saying, well, maybe the tradition needs to shift a little bit here, right? Maybe bourbon can't go into new charred oak. And we think, oh my gosh, we've just put the cat among the pigeons, right?
Yeah.
And now we start with this, like, well, if a solution lives on the mainland, you're not peating with Islay peat on Islay. Yeah. How does that affect what you're distilling, what you're producing? Henry mentions it in the article, right? There's a bit of a marketing angle here as well. And we know that marketing departments will pivot to whatever they need to pivot to. But as consumers, what do we think about our beloved traditional Islay practices and methods changing to overcome a 21st century issue?
Yeah, I think Bruichladdich gets away with it not using Islay peated barley because they are they're the Mavericks, right? That's been their story since the rebirth of Bruichladdich. We're gonna do it our way, right? They've built a new tradition. I just don't think Bowmore and Bunnahabhain and these other non-Diageo distilleries can so easily say, here's a new tradition, right? Mm-hmm. If you start sourcing peated barley that isn't peated with Islay peat, it's going to significantly change the flavor profile. And so if they need to maintain that, they either have to get the peat off Islay, send it off island,
right?
Goes to Baird's, it goes to Simpson's, whomever, Munton's, whomever. They peat it, then it gets sent back. That's a massive carbon footprint in a time where all distilleries are saying, we're done with carbon footprints. We're trying to be green and right? Fucking hell.
It's a lot. It's absolutely a lot. But we're not going to solve it in a tight 35, Joshua. We're only going to bring it to the attention of our listeners. And if you want to write in, give us your thoughts. Questions at onenationunderwhiskey.com or info@singlecastnation.com. We'd certainly love to hear from you. If you have a non-Islay whiskey story, feel free to send that in. We can cover that on an extra.
Please,
Just so long as it's not about an impending yeast shortage. I just don't think I could take it right now. It's the last thing left. It's in the air. So at least it's in the air. Cardboard isn't in the air. Barley isn't in the air. At least yeast is in the air. So, all right. We're going to get out of here, Joshua. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Michael Nolan sent it in as well. Give us the link.
Thank you.
To all those industry folk we've discussed it with in the last week, month, couple of months. Thanks to them. And here we are, wrapping it up, getting out of here. See you in the next episode. Peace.
Peace. Jason, there are comments on this article that has me rolling. Oh, open up the article. Do you want to go one for one on this?
Yeah, I'm taking it out of reader view to expose the comments.
Oh, you're going to whip it out and expose the comments? Whip it out of reader view?
Just the 5.
Just the 5. So the first one is someone who says, the person you hate. And let's see if his comment holds up to his handle. Using peat for this is fucking disgusting. Alcohol is truly the most destructive drug, apparently on more than one front.
That sounds like somebody fun to go drinking with. They probably get into a fight in every bar they go into. The response from Bully is, at least there's no shortage of internet trolls.
That was good. That was very good. And then Paul Moss also responded, and he says to the person you hate, he says, "Go fuck yourself. This is a way of life that has been for hundreds of years. If you don't like it, hard luck." Hard luck. I want to start telling people that more, like hard luck. Hard luck.
I'm with John J. LaRue, who says, define Maltster.
Yeah, and then he followed up. He says, "Are these peating warehouses?" So I think John LaRue...
Insightful.
But I think John LaRue is asking a legitimate question. He doesn't know what a maltster is. And he does. Is a maltster a peating warehouse, right? So John LaRue, if you're listening to this little Easter egg, a maltster is a company that farms sell their barley to, and they will malt the barley.
Producing the sugars that will then be present in fermentation for the creation of alcohol.
There you go. There you go. Beauty. Jason, it's been real. Go fuck yourself. This is a way of life that has been for hundreds of years.
Yeah. If this episode isn't a Type 35, hard luck.
Hard luck. Hard luck.